Thank you for being here. Please grab a warm glass of water, sit back, and listen as I tell you the whole story. The scent of expensive Chardonnay and fresh white hydrangeas should have made the night absolutely perfect. It was my engagement party, a night that was supposed to be about my future, held in the massive glass-walled sunroom of the sprawling estate I grew up in. My fiancée, Chloe, stood by my side wearing a simple but stunning navy blue dress. Her fingers were gently intertwined with mine, her thumb rhythmically rubbing the back of my hand. She was a silent, steady anchor in a room full of people who felt much more like strangers than actual family members. Soft jazz music played from the high-end ceiling speakers, blending smoothly with the polite, meaningless chatter of 50 guests holding crystal glasses. But beneath that polished surface, the air in that room was completely toxic. My family was not there to celebrate my engagement. They were simply tolerating my presence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike and get exactly what they wanted. The ambush had been building up for 2 solid weeks, but I never in a million years thought my own father would turn a night meant for celebration into a public execution. It happened so fast. The jazz music was still playing when my dad, Joseph, marched aggressively across the polished marble floor. His face was flushed a deep, angry red, radiating the intense heat of too much expensive scotch and raw, unhinged anger. He did not care who was watching. He grabbed my shoulder, his heavy fingers digging into the fabric of my tailored suit jacket like actual claws. He leaned in close, his breath reeking of liquor and cigars, and his voice cut through the ambient noise of the room, loud enough to stop the music dead in its tracks. "We are done playing games, Matthew," he snarled, the thick veins in his neck bulging against his collar. "Give your $100,000 fund to your brother right now. You sign it over tonight, or this engagement is over, and you are no longer a part of this family." I just stared at him. The entire room went dead silent. 50 pairs of eyes locked onto us in shock. Chloe stepped forward, her voice calm but incredibly firm. "Sir, you need to step back right now." "Shut your mouth," my dad snapped, violently shoving Chloe's arm. She stumbled backward, her heel catching awkwardly on the edge of the Persian rug. That was it. The final thread tying me to this family snapped. I stepped directly between them, my fists clenched tightly at my sides. "Don't you ever touch her again," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. "And no, I am not giving Carter a single dime of my money. I am entirely done funding his fake life." The slap I expected didn't come. A closed fist did. My dad swung with absolutely everything he had. His knuckles connected directly with the left side of my jaw. The sickening crack echoed off the glass walls like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side, the world spinning wildly for a split second as I staggered back, knocking over a silver tray of champagne flutes. Glass shattered loudly across the marble floor. I immediately tasted heavy copper in my mouth. Warm blood pooled on my tongue and dripped from my split lip directly onto my crisp white shirt. I heard a few scattered gasps from the crowd, but when I looked up, wiping the thick streak of blood from my chin with the back of my hand, I didn't see any horror on my family's faces. My mother, Martha, just let out an annoyed, dramatic sigh, acting as if I had simply spilled a glass of red wine on her favorite rug. And my brother, Carter, stood lazily in the corner by the bar. He had a smug smirk plastered across his face, gently swirling the ice in his cocktail glass, thoroughly enjoying the show. I didn't yell. I didn't swing back. I just looked at the man who had raised me, finally realizing that the father I had always desperately wanted to make proud was nothing but a violent, greedy bully. "You're dead to us," my dad spat, casually straightening his silk tie. I grabbed Chloe's hand. "Let's go," I told her. We walked out of the sunroom, our shoes crunching loudly over the broken glass. I didn't look back. I left them standing there in their beautiful stolen house. What my dad didn't know as he watched me walk out the front door was that he had just signed his own eviction notice. To understand how karma hit them like a freight train, we have to go back to a safe I hadn't opened in 5 years. Growing up in that massive estate, I always felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. The house was enormous, filled with heavy antique furniture, expensive imported rugs, and large oil portraits of people I barely knew. But despite the extreme wealth radiating from the very walls, none of it ever felt like it belonged to me. That was Carter's world. I was just living on the edges of it. The divide between my younger brother and me wasn't just a crack. It was a massive canyon. Carter was the undisputed golden child, the miracle baby who could do absolutely no wrong. I was just the placeholder. By the time I was 16 years old, I was working long weekend shifts at a dusty local hardware store just to afford my own winter clothes and save up for a heavily used car. I worked grueling 60-hour weeks during my summer breaks. I took immense pride in my small salary, knowing I earned every single penny through my own sweat. Carter, on the other hand, woke up on his 16th birthday to a brand new, fully loaded SUV parked in the driveway with a giant red bow on it. My mom, Martha, enabled his every single whim. If Carter wanted something, it was immediately classified as a necessity. If I needed something, it was treated as a massive financial burden. But it was my dad, Joseph, who truly set the toxic standard for the house. For him, life was entirely about appearances and projecting wealth. He cared vastly more about what his wealthy golf buddies thought of him than whether his two sons were actually decent human beings. I distinctly remember the night the reality of my family truly crystallized for me. I was 19 years old, home from college for a long holiday weekend. Carter was 17 and had sneakily taken his brand new SUV out for a late-night joyride. He came home at 2 in the morning, completely panicked and reeking strongly of cheap weed. He had sideswiped the neighbor's parked Lexus, causing thousands of dollars in deep cosmetic damage. The very next morning, 2 police officers were standing at our heavy oak front door. I stood silently on the top of the grand staircase, watching my dad speak in hushed tones to the officers. When he finally closed the door, he didn't run upstairs to scream at Carter. He walked straight up the stairs, looked me dead in the eye and said, "You were driving last night, Matthew." His voice was entirely flat, leaving absolutely no room for argument or discussion. "What? No, I wasn't. I was asleep in my room," I replied, utterly confused by the accusation. My mom stepped up right beside him, her face completely stony. "Your brother is applying to several Ivy League schools next month. A police record for reckless driving will completely ruin his chances. You already go to a basic state school. A minor record won't matter for your future. Take the blame." They didn't ask me. They demanded it. They actually took the college fund that I had partially saved myself from working at the hardware store and used it to pay off the neighbor quietly so no formal criminal charges were pressed. All while making me take the fall and lie to the auto insurance company. My monthly premiums skyrocketed. Carter didn't even bother to say thank you. He just complained loudly for a week that he couldn't drive his car while it was sitting in the auto body shop. That was the exact day I learned my true value in that house. I was nothing more than the human shield they used to protect Carter from his own mistakes. The only person in that entire house who ever saw through the pathetic charade was my grandpa Samuel. He was the man who built the family wealth from the absolute ground up. He started with a single, small hardware store and ruthlessly turned it into a massive, highly profitable real estate portfolio. He was a tough, no-nonsense, callous man who valued hard work and integrity above all else. He lived quietly in the east wing of the massive estate, mostly keeping to his private study. Grandpa Samuel knew exactly who my dad was. He clearly saw the massive gambling debts my dad desperately tried to hide from the public eye. He saw the ridiculous, overpriced country club memberships and the completely empty vanity of his son. And he saw right through Carter's lazy, arrogant entitlement. When Grandpa Samuel got severely sick, the beautiful house quickly turned into a vulture's nest. My parents were constantly whispering loudly in the hallways about the inheritance. They were already aggressively planning expensive kitchen renovations and European vacations before the poor man had even passed away. They practically planned the catered menu for the funeral while he was still upstairs breathing through an oxygen tank. Exactly a week before he died, Grandpa Samuel called me alone into his study. The heavy room smelled richly of old paper, leather bindings, and his signature pipe tobacco. He looked incredibly frail sitting deep in his oversized leather armchair, but his eyes were still as sharp as shattered glass. "Matthew," he said, weakly gesturing for me to sit on the sofa opposite him. "This family is rapidly rotting from the inside out. Your father loves the shiny appearance of status far more than the blood running in his own veins. And your brother is nothing but a lazy parasite." I didn't say anything back to him. I just sat there, feeling a heavy, painful lump form deep in my throat. It was the very first time in my entire life that anyone had verbally validated the isolation I had felt. He reached slowly into his top desk drawer with a trembling hand and pulled out a small, heavy envelope sealed with red wax. He slid it carefully across the mahogany desk. "There is a small fireproof safe hidden securely behind the far bookshelf. This envelope contains the combination. I am setting things right for you. But listen to me very carefully, son. Do not open that safe until they cross the line of no return. Do not open it until they show you exactly who they truly are, and you realize with certainty that they cannot be saved." He passed away quietly just a few days later. My parents threw an incredibly lavish, expensive funeral, treating the somber occasion much more like a high-end networking event than a mourning period. My dad strutted around the reception acting like he was the newly crowned king of the castle. I kept the small envelope hidden away, honoring my grandfather's strict final wish. I went back to my life, focused intensely on my career, finally earned a major promotion, and built a quiet, peaceful life with Chloe in our apartment. I tried to just be a good son from a safe distance. Fast forward to 2 weeks before my disastrous engagement party. Carter dropped a massive bomb on the family over a group text. He proudly announced he was officially engaged to Mia, a girl whose last name happened to be Vanderbilt. Yes, those Vanderbilts. Or at least, a very wealthy, highly connected branch of them. Mia was everything my shallow parents actively worshipped. Old money, highly connected, and incredibly condescending to anyone she deemed beneath her. She looked at our family like we were an amusing, slightly pathetic charity project. But her powerful family demanded solid proof of wealth before they would even consider signing off on the marriage. They wanted to know exactly what financial assets Carter brought to the table. My parents panicked immediately. My dad's hidden gambling debts had quietly eaten away at almost all the cash reserves Grandpa Samuel had left them. The estate was beautiful and grand, but they were incredibly cash poor. So what did my dad do to fix it? He doubled down on his ridiculous lies. He leased a bright red Ferrari for Carter, paying a massive monthly premium they absolutely couldn't afford, just so Carter could pull up to the Vanderbilt estate looking like a young, self-made tech millionaire. We had a tense family dinner to celebrate Carter's sudden engagement. I drove my reliable, completely paid-off, 5-year-old sedan and parked it directly next to the gleaming rented Ferrari in the circular driveway. At the long dining room table, Mia barely acknowledged my existence. She spent the entire grueling meal closely inspecting her manicured nails and complaining loudly about the potential catering options at her upcoming destination wedding. "Carter tells me you just work in logistics," Mia said suddenly, looking directly at me like I was a squashed bug on her windshield. "How perfectly quaint. Are you hoping to finally earn a decent management salary eventually? Or do you just enjoy driving that little beater car parked outside?" Carter laughed out loud. A loud, obnoxious, braying sound that echoed in the dining room. My parents immediately joined in, chuckling as if Mia had just told a brilliant joke. "Matthew is just our late bloomer." My mom chimed in, reaching over to affectionately pat Mia's hand. "He's very simple. But Carter, oh, our Carter is clearly destined for great, important things." I squeezed my silver fork tightly. I didn't bother to defend myself. I knew the actual truth. I knew my recent promotion made me out-earn Carter by a mile, considering he hadn't held a steady, paying job in over 2 years. I knew that shiny red Ferrari was rented on borrowed credit. But they were all so utterly desperate to impress this arrogant girl that they were perfectly willing to tear me down just to build Carter up a tiny fraction of an inch higher. I ate the rest of my dinner in total silence, completely disgusted by the circus performing around me. The real, calculated betrayal started later that same week. I was standing in the massive kitchen of the estate, helping prepare some food for an upcoming family gathering. I was quietly chopping vegetables when my mom slid smoothly into the room, followed very closely by my Aunt Patricia. Aunt Patricia was the absolute worst kind of emotional manipulator. She possessed a sweet, dripping Southern Belle voice and always brought homemade casseroles to family events. But she was always the one aggressively pulling the toxic strings behind the scenes. She had gone through an incredibly messy divorce a few years back, fighting tooth and nail in a bitter custody battle over her own kids. Ever since that divorce, she viewed every single family interaction as a calculated financial transaction. She was my mother's primary advisor in all things manipulative. "Matthew, honey?" Aunt Patricia purred softly, leaning casually against the cold granite counter. "Your mother and I were just talking about Carter's upcoming wedding. It's going to be a truly spectacular event down in Cabo." "That's great, Aunt Pat," I said, intentionally not looking up from the wooden cutting board. My mom took a very deep breath, quickly putting on her best, most serious negotiation face. "The thing is, Matthew, the Vanderbilts expect a very certain level of grandeur and luxury, and the specific beach venue Carter absolutely wants requires a massive, non-refundable deposit by this Friday." I stopped chopping the bell peppers. I knew exactly where this conversation was going. And frankly, my mom said, completely dropping the sweet, motherly act, "You have that untouched investment account, the $100,000 Grandpa Samuel left specifically in your name. You haven't touched a single dime of it." I froze in place. The sharp chef's knife hovered perfectly still in my hand. That money was my ultimate safety net. It was the essential fund Chloe and I were going to use to put a down payment on our very first house. "That's my money, Mom. Grandpa left it to me, not to Carter." "Oh, please don't be so overly dramatic," Aunt Patricia chimed in, rolling her heavily mascaraed eyes. "You and Chloe are so remarkably simple. You really don't need a big, fancy house. You can just do a very small, cheap backyard wedding. Carter needs to make a massive statement. You owe it to your own brother to help him securely lock down this marriage." Before I could firmly tell Aunt Patricia to get entirely out of my face and mind her own business, my dad walked purposefully into the kitchen, firmly crossing his arms over his chest. The trap was officially closed around me. "You are going to transfer that money directly to my bank account by tomorrow morning," my dad commanded. It was absolutely not a request. It was a direct order. "You have a strict duty to this family to ensure we look good to the Vanderbilts. Your brother is marrying way up. We need the cash right now." "No," I said incredibly firmly, turning my body to face him directly. "I work hard for my money. You leased a Ferrari you clearly can't afford. That is your financial problem, Dad, not mine." My dad's face darkened into a terrifying scowl. "You are going to deeply regret being this selfish, Matthew. I promise you that." The large kitchen went dead silent. The Cold War had officially begun. For the next 14 agonizing days leading up to my engagement party, I was completely exiled from the family. My family cut off all forms of communication. They didn't call. They didn't send a single text. Aunt Patricia eagerly went to work calling every single extended family member on the contact list, maliciously spinning a wild story about how I was hoarding money and actively trying to sabotage my own brother's happiness out of pure, bitter jealousy. I tried to ignore the swirling drama. I focused intently on my work at the office and finishing the planning for my engagement party with Chloe. But they were absolutely not done trying to break me down. Exactly 3 days before the party, my younger cousin Dylan unexpectedly showed up at my apartment door. Dylan was Aunt Patricia's oldest son. He had always been the quiet, observant one, the guy who generally stayed entirely out of the toxic family politics. He brought a cold 6-pack of beer and a very sympathetic, warm smile. "Man, things are completely crazy back at the house," Dylan said, sitting heavily on my living room couch and popping open a beer. "Uncle Joseph is literally losing his mind over this Cabo deposit deadline. I just wanted to come by and see how you were doing. Personally, I think they're being totally unfair to you." For a brief, fleeting second, I felt a massive wave of relief wash over me. Finally, someone in this insane family who actually saw reality for what it was. We talked casually for about an hour. I eventually went into the kitchen to grab us some leftover pizza from the fridge. When I walked quietly back into the living room, Dylan didn't hear me approach. He was standing directly by my home office desk. My laptop was wide open, actively displaying my secure online banking dashboard. Dylan had his smartphone out, rapidly snapping clear pictures of my private account balances and routing numbers. My blood instantly ran freezing cold. The severe betrayal hit me like a physical punch to the gut. "What the hell are you doing, Dylan?" I asked, my voice echoing in the small room. He jumped violently, nearly dropping his phone onto the desk. He stammered nervously, his face instantly turning a pale, sickly white. I was just quickly checking a text message. "I swear, man." I walked over aggressively, snatched his phone from his shaking hand, and looked down at the bright screen. He was currently in an active group chat with my dad, my mom, and his mother, Aunt Patricia. The very last message sent from my dad read, "Get the exact account numbers. I'm having my lawyer draft a temporary freeze order. We'll claim he stole the funds from the estate." I looked up at Dylan. I didn't even yell. I just felt utterly, profoundly disgusted. "Get out of my house right now." He scrambled frantically for the front door, not saying a single word in his defense. I slammed it and locked it securely behind him. They weren't just aggressively asking for the money anymore. They were actively plotting to steal it directly from me using fake legal threats. I slowly closed my laptop. The very last shred of hope I had for my family completely evaporated into thin air in that exact moment. Despite the extreme hostility, my parents insisted heavily on hosting my engagement party at the estate anyway. It was all about maintaining public appearances. If they suddenly canceled the large event, the nosy country club crowd would definitely ask uncomfortable questions. So, they decided to play the role of the happy, generous hosts, smiling widely for the hired cameras while keeping a sharp knife ready right behind their backs. When Chloe and I finally arrived that evening, the estate looked absolutely beautiful. The expensive catering was flawless, the lighting was perfect, but the energy in the air was completely suffocating. Extended family members who had heard all of Aunt Patricia's vicious lies gave me tight, incredibly fake smiles before immediately turning their backs to whisper to each other. I was standing alone near the outdoor patio when James, the estate's head butler who had loyally worked for Grandpa Samuel for over 30 years, quietly approached me from the shadows. James was a highly dignified, older man who usually stayed completely invisible during these events. Tonight, his wrinkled face looked deeply, genuinely concerned. He handed me a fresh drink and leaned in very close to my ear. "Matthew, you need to be incredibly careful tonight," he whispered urgently. "What is it, James?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Your father has been locked in his office drinking neat scotch since noon today. He had a massive screaming match on the phone earlier with the luxury dealership about the Ferrari lease payment. He's incredibly desperate for cash. I overheard him telling your mother that he is going to physically force you to sign a transfer document tonight in front of everyone. He thinks if he creates a massive public scene, you'll cave immediately just to avoid the embarrassment." I nodded slowly, looking out at the large crowd of oblivious guests. "Thank you for telling me, James. I truly appreciate it. Your grandfather would be very, very proud of the strong man you've become," James added softly before slipping away silently back into the busy kitchen. Just then, the heavy front doors burst wide open. Carter had finally arrived. He walked in over an hour late, his silk tie completely undone, already loudly slurring his words to the valet. He had clearly been drinking heavily before he even got here. He stumbled aggressively past the elaborate dessert table, nearly knocking over our expensive, tiered engagement cake, laughing loudly and obnoxiously as Mia trailed a few steps behind him looking absolutely mortified. The dark storm was rapidly gathering. The air pressure in the room noticeably dropped. I looked over at Chloe, and she gave me a tight, incredibly reassuring squeeze of my hand. The explosive fuse was lit, and I knew for a fact my father was about to strike the match. It happened exactly as James warned it would, leading right up to that horrific moment in the sunroom. My dad didn't pull me aside privately to the study to have a quiet conversation. He waited maliciously until the room was completely full, until the music was playing softly in the background, and then he marched over to execute his desperate plan. When he aggressively shoved Chloe, the entire world seemed to slow down into frame-by-frame motion. The sight of her stumbling backward, her eyes wide with shock, completely erased any lingering hesitation or familial loyalty I had left. I stepped directly in front of her. I told him absolutely no. I told him I wouldn't fund Carter's pathetic, fake life for one more second. And then he actually swung. The brutal impact of his heavy fist against my jaw was incredibly jarring. The intense physical pain was sharp, a blinding flash of white light exploding right behind my eyes. But the emotional pain, that was entirely absent. As I stood there, tasting the warm, metallic tang of blood pooling in my mouth, I realized something incredibly profound. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel broken or rejected. I looked over at my mother. Martha was casually brushing an imaginary piece of lint off her expensive designer dress, looking mildly annoyed that the confrontation was a bit too loud for her taste. I looked over at Carter. He was grinning widely, taking a slow sip of his amber drink, clearly enjoying the violent show. I looked at Aunt Patricia, who was already whispering furiously to another guest, actively spinning the narrative that I had somehow violently provoked him into hitting me. "You're dead to us?" My dad had spat, his chest heaving with exertion. Honestly, it was the most incredibly freeing sentence I had ever heard in my 29 years of life. The little, hopeful boy inside me who desperately wanted his dad to be a hero, who desperately wanted his mom to love him just as much as she loved his brother, that boy finally permanently died. In his place stood a grown man who finally realized he owed these toxic people absolutely nothing. The heavy silence in the room was absolutely deafening. Not a single person moved to help me. Not a single person checked to see if Chloe was okay. They all just watched in silence, fully complicit in the abuse, waiting eagerly to see if I would finally break down, cry, and hand over the money to buy back my father's highly conditional love. I reached up slowly, wiping the thick streak of blood from my chin. I looked my father dead in the eye. My jaw throbbed with a dull, heavy ache, but my voice was completely, terrifyingly steady. "You are an incredibly weak, pathetic man, Joseph," I said, projecting my voice loud enough for every single guest in the room to hear clearly. "You have absolutely nothing but a rented car and a massive mountain of hidden debt. And you will never, ever see a single dime from me." My dad let out a roar and lunged forward again, raising his fist for a second strike. But this time, two of his golf buddies rushed forward and grabbed his arms, holding him back forcefully to avoid the police being called to the estate. I simply turned my back on him. I wrapped my arm firmly and protectively around Chloe's waist and guided her carefully through the stunned crowd. The sea of well-dressed guests parted quickly for us, their eyes wide. We walked confidently out the heavy oak front doors and stepped out into the cool, crisp night air. I didn't even bother to grab my expensive coat from the coat check. I didn't look back at the sprawling, brightly lit estate. We drove all the way back to our small apartment in complete silence. The adrenaline was slowly fading from my system, leaving a dull, intense throbbing ache in my jaw and a slight ringing in my left ear. When we finally got inside, Chloe didn't say a word. She went straight to the freezer, pulled out a bag of frozen peas, wrapped it carefully in a clean kitchen towel, and gently pressed it against my rapidly swelling face. She looked deeply at me, her eyes completely filled with tears. Not tears for herself, but tears for me. "Matthew, I am so incredibly sorry. We really should call the police. What he did was straight-up assault." I sat heavily on the edge of our worn-out couch, staring blankly at the dark television screen. I thought seriously about calling the cops. I thought about the messy, drawn-out legal battle, the embarrassing local headlines, and the endless, exhausting drama Aunt Patricia would inevitably spin to the rest of the family. "No," I said quietly, my voice raspy. "Matthew, he hit you in the face. You cannot just let him get away with that." "I'm not letting him get away with it," I replied, slowly pulling the ice pack away from my face. "Calling the police is way too easy for him. He'd just post bail, hire an expensive defense lawyer, and drag the case out for years while still living extremely comfortably in that massive house. I don't want a simple restraining order, Chloe. I want total justice." I stood up slowly, my joints aching, and walked purposefully into our bedroom. I went straight to the back of the walk-in closet, aggressively pushing aside old shoe boxes and winter coats until I reached a small, incredibly heavy fireproof safe that was bolted securely to the floorboards. I hadn't touched that safe since the exact day Grandpa Samuel gave me the secret code. "Do not open it until they show you exactly who they are, and you realize they cannot be saved." They had finally shown me. They had plotted maliciously to steal my savings. They had publicly humiliated me in front of 50 people. And my own father had violently assaulted me while my mother watched with absolute boredom. There was absolutely nothing left to save or protect. I knelt down on the carpet, took a deep breath, and reached out for the cold metal dial of the safe. I carefully entered the specific numbers. Grandpa Samuel's exact birthday. The heavy metal mechanism clicked loudly, and the thick door swung open smoothly. Inside the dark space, it still smelled faintly of his signature pipe tobacco. There was no massive stack of hidden cash, no secret gold bars. There was only a single, thick, cream-colored manila envelope. I pulled it out gently, my hands trembling just slightly from the lingering adrenaline, and sat heavily on the edge of our bed. Chloe stood silently in the bedroom doorway, watching me with wide, curious eyes. I broke the old wax seal on the back of the envelope and slid the heavy, official documents out onto the blanket. The very first page was a letter, meticulously handwritten by my grandfather in his distinct, looping cursive. "Matthew, if you are reading this letter right now, it means Joseph has finally crossed the absolute line of no return." I sat back and watched him completely ruin his own life with his unchecked vanity and his massive gambling debts, and I watched Martha happily let him do it. I simply could not leave my life's legacy in their destructive hands. They love the fake appearance of wealth far more than they love you. I know exactly how they treat you behind closed doors. I see the honorable man you are becoming despite them. They truly think they own the estate. They absolutely do not. When I got sick, I quietly hired lawyers and established the Samuel Family Trust. I legally transferred the deed of the house, the surrounding land, and all the remaining liquid assets directly into this ironclad trust. Your parents are not the legal beneficiaries. You are. I made you the sole trustee and the absolute sole beneficiary. For the last 5 years, Joseph and Martha have just been guests living on your property. Remind them exactly who holds the keys. Make me proud. Grandpa Samuel. I stared blindly at the dried ink. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I frantically flipped to the next thick document. It was the official property deed, officially stamped and notarized by the county clerk. Under the highlighted section titled Legal Owner, it didn't say Joseph's name. It clearly said the Samuel Family Trust, Matthew as sole trustee. I owned the entire estate, the massive house with the beautiful sunroom where my father had just punched me in the face, the long circular driveway where Carter proudly parked his rented Ferrari, the large granite kitchen where my mother had coldly plotted to steal my money. None of it belonged to them. They hadn't paid a single dime in property taxes because the trust paid it automatically from Grandpa's separate, hidden account. They had been living an absolute lie for 5 long years, completely and utterly clueless. I wasn't the pathetic outcast of the family anymore. I was their actual landlord. A slow, terrifyingly powerful sense of clarity washed completely over me. I looked up at Chloe, sliding the heavy deed across the bedspread toward her. She read it quickly, her eyes widening in absolute disbelief. She covered her mouth with both of her hands. "Matthew, this legally means." "It means," I said, a very cold, genuine smile finally breaking across my bruised face, that it's finally time to take out the trash. First thing Monday morning, I didn't bother going to work at the office. I drove straight downtown to a massive high-rise glass building and walked confidently into the sleek office of Harper and Associates. Harper was an absolute shark of a lawyer. She wore sharp, impeccably tailored suits, had eyes that pierced like a hawk, and possessed a terrifying reputation for utterly dismantling arrogant opponents in complex property and civil disputes. I sat down across from her massive oak desk and silently slid Grandpa Samuel's thick envelope toward her. "I want to legally evict my parents," I said simply and directly. Harper raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow, pulling the stack of documents out. She read carefully through the intricate trust agreement and the stamped property deed in total silence. When she finally finished reading, she looked up, a very predatory, satisfied smirk playing on her lips. "This is incredibly airtight," Harper said, tapping a manicured fingernail against the deed. "Your grandfather was a brilliantly smart man. He set this up perfectly as a blind trust to shield it completely from your father's many aggressive creditors. Legally speaking, they are currently classified as tenants at sufferance. Basically, they are just squatters sitting on very nice furniture. I want them out of my house," I said. Immediately, Harper leaned back slowly in her expensive leather chair, steepling her fingers together. "We could just easily send a standard 30-day notice to vacate the premises. But if your father is as incredibly stubborn and broke as you say he is, he'll fight it. He'll absolutely refuse to leave, drag it deep into eviction court, and that messy process could easily take 6 months. We need to apply pressure. Real, crushing financial pressure." "What exactly do you suggest?" I asked, leaning in closer. "We don't just legally evict them. We sue them," Harper said, her eyes flashing with pure legal malice. "They have been living in a multi-million-dollar property for 5 entire years without paying a single cent in rent. As the active trustee, you have a strict fiduciary duty to maximize the trust's financial assets. We officially file a massive lawsuit for 5 years of back rent calculated at fair market value. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. We file the aggressive suit and simultaneously, I request an emergency judicial freeze on all their remaining bank accounts pending the litigation." I stared at her, deeply absorbing the brutal strategy. It was incredibly ruthless. It was perfectly surgical. Once the bank freeze hits and the massive lawsuit lands directly on their front doorstep, Harper continued, her voice practically purring, they will realize immediately they are facing total, unrecoverable financial ruin. They won't even be able to pay a cheap defense lawyer. That's exactly when we offer them a settlement. A legal trapdoor. "What's the settlement?" I asked. "They sign a legally binding, ironclad agreement to voluntarily vacate the premises completely within 30 days and formally waive all legal rights to challenge the eviction. In exchange, you simply drop the lawsuit for the back rent. They either leave quietly and quickly, or they go entirely bankrupt fighting a war they've already completely lost." It was a brilliant masterstroke. It wasn't just kicking them out. It was systematically dismantling their entire illusion of control and power. It was violently forcing my father to realize he was completely powerless against me. "Draft the paperwork," I said, my voice completely steady. "File the lawsuit. Freeze the accounts. Send the notice." Harper smiled warmly. "It will be delivered directly by a process server on Wednesday morning. Happy hunting, Matthew." The trap I had carefully set with lawyer Harper didn't just snap shut. It slammed down with the devastating force of a falling anvil. Wednesday morning arrived exactly as Harper promised it would. I was sitting quietly at my kitchen island in my apartment, sipping a hot cup of black coffee, watching the digital red numbers on my microwave tick over to exactly 9 o'clock. I knew exactly what was happening at that very second. Right about now, a professional, completely humorless process server was walking up the long, perfectly manicured driveway of my estate. Right about now, he was ringing the heavy brass doorbell. And right about now, he was handing a thick, terrifying stack of legal documents directly to my father. I didn't have to wait very long for the massive fallout to reach me. At exactly 9:15, my cell phone started vibrating aggressively across the cold granite countertop. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I didn't pick it up immediately. I let it ring 4 times, listening to the buzzing sound, taking another slow, deliberate sip of my dark coffee. I wanted her to sweat. Then, I finally hit the green answer button and put the phone on speaker, resting my hands on the counter. "Matthew!" My mother shrieked instantly. Her voice was completely hysterical, a sharp, piercing, guttural sound that lacked absolutely all of her usual refined, country club polish. "Matthew, you need to call this off right now. Some absolute lunatic just came to our front door and handed your father a massive lawsuit. He's threatening to sue us for hundreds of thousands of dollars in back rent. And my debit card just declined at the grocery store. I had a cart full of food, and the machine said declined. The bank teller on the phone said our accounts are completely frozen. Tell this Harper woman there has been a massive, ridiculous mistake." I leaned forward, resting my elbows heavily on the counter. My voice was completely flat, utterly devoid of any sympathy or warmth. "There is absolutely no mistake, Mom. The bank accounts are frozen by a federal judge because you are being actively sued for 5 entire years of unpaid rent. And you are being sued because you are currently squatting in a multimillion-dollar house that does not legally belong to you." The line went dead silent for a few long, agonizing seconds. I could hear her ragged, panicked breathing through the speaker. "What in the world are you talking about? Your father owns that house. Grandpa Samuel left the inheritance to him." "No, Mom," I corrected her, my tone dropping to a cold, unforgiving whisper. "Grandpa Samuel left the inheritance entirely to me. He set up an ironclad blind trust 5 years ago because he knew Dad's massive gambling debts would completely bankrupt the family. He made me the sole trustee and the sole beneficiary. I own the house. I own the land. Dad is just a very ungrateful guest. And frankly, you have both severely overstayed your welcome." "You wouldn't dare do this?" she gasped, her voice trembling with genuine, raw fear for the very first time in her pampered life. "You cannot do this to your own family. We gave you everything. We raised you, Matthew. You raised me to be a human shield for Carter." I shot back, the years of suppressed anger finally bubbling up into my words. "You stood in that beautiful sunroom and sighed with annoyance while my father punched me in the face. You aggressively plotted with Aunt Patricia to steal my hard-earned savings. You don't get to play the victim now." "Please," she sobbed loudly. "Carter's wedding is in exactly 30 days. Then I highly suggest you start packing your boxes very quickly," I said smoothly. "People who assault the landlord get evicted. You have exactly 30 days. Do not call this number again." I pressed the end call button. The silence in my apartment was absolutely beautiful. The next 30 days felt like an absolute masterclass in psychological warfare. I completely blocked my parents' phone numbers from my device. I blocked Aunt Patricia and her entire side of the family. I ignored the frantic, legally threatening emails my dad desperately sent from his work computer. Lawyer Harper handled all the communications, standing like a brick wall between them and me. Just as she expertly predicted, they didn't have a single legal leg to stand on. With their bank accounts legally frozen solid by a federal judge, they couldn't even afford to hire a junior lawyer to review the documents, let alone fight a massive civil litigation in court. Exactly 5 days after the lawsuit was formally served, a heavily defeated, utterly broken Joseph signed the harsh settlement agreement. They legally agreed to vacate the estate completely by the end of the month to avoid bankruptcy. Ironically, their absolute deadline to move out of the house fell on the exact same weekend as Carter's massive, over-the-top destination wedding to Mia Vanderbilt. They had kept the embarrassing eviction a total, closely guarded secret from Mia's wealthy family, desperately trying to keep up the fake illusion of extreme wealth just long enough to get the official marriage certificate signed and filed. Chloe and I were technically still invited to the wedding reception, purely because uninviting us at the last minute would raise far too many uncomfortable questions among the nosy extended family. They fully expected me to stay home out of shame and embarrassment. They were incredibly wrong. The wedding reception was held at a ridiculously expensive, exclusive oceanfront hotel. It looked exactly like a royal coronation. There were massive, towering ice sculptures, tens of thousands of imported white roses, and an open bar serving top-shelf liquor to hundreds of wealthy guests. When Chloe and I arrived, we looked absolutely flawless. I wore a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit, and Chloe wore a stunning, elegant emerald green gown. We didn't walk in with our heads down. We walked in like we owned the entire building. We deliberately did not sit at the reserved family tables near the front of the ballroom. We stood near the back, leaning casually against a high-top table, quietly observing the circus around us. I spotted my parents immediately. My dad looked absolutely terrible. His expensive rented tuxedo hung loosely on his frame. His face was a sickly pale color, and he was sweating profusely under the bright chandelier lights. He was constantly checking his gold watch, knowing for a fact that a cheap moving crew was actively emptying their remaining belongings into a storage unit back at the estate. My mom looked like she was heavily medicated, forcing a stiff, shiny plastic smile for the roaming photographers. Then I finally saw Carter. He was standing near the dead center of the room, holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne, laughing loudly and obnoxiously with some of Mia's wealthy cousins. He looked completely oblivious to the fact that his entire financial world was currently burning to the ground behind his back. He spotted me from across the crowded room. His arrogant, familiar smirk widened. He whispered something into the ear of his new bride, Mia, and then confidently strutted across the polished ballroom floor directly toward me, completely ready to gloat. Mia trailed slowly behind him, holding the train of her massive dress, looking incredibly annoyed that she had to interact with the poor side of the family on her special day. Well, Carter sneered loudly, stopping just a few feet from me. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne. I honestly didn't think you would have the guts to show your face here tonight, Matthew, especially after you threw that massive temper tantrum at your own party. I see you're still driving that pathetic little sedan. Did you park it around the block so the valets wouldn't laugh at you? I just smiled warmly at him. It's good to see you too, Carter. Congratulations on the wedding. Mia stepped up right next to him, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. Let's keep this very brief, Carter. The professional photographer wants us standing by the main ice sculpture in exactly 5 minutes for family portraits. I'm just giving my big brother a quick, much-needed reality check, Carter said, casually adjusting his expensive silk bow tie. Dad told me you finally cut us off entirely. Good riddance. I don't need your pathetic little savings account anyway. I'm marrying into real, actual money now. My Ferrari is parked out front with a VIP tag, and we're flying out to a private island for the honeymoon tomorrow morning. You should probably just leave right now before you embarrass yourself further in front of these people. I didn't flinch. I didn't get angry. I didn't raise my voice. I just took a very slow, highly calculated step forward, completely invading his personal space. I leaned in very close, bringing my mouth right next to his ear so only he and his new wife could hear my specific words over the loud, thumping party music. Enjoy the honeymoon, Carter, I whispered, my voice dripping with absolute, unforgiving ice. Because you are going to desperately need the vacation. When you fly back to the city next week, I highly suggest you clear out your new guest room. Carter pulled his head back quickly, his arrogant smirk faltering just a tiny fraction. He looked genuinely confused. What the hell are you talking about? I kept my voice perfectly steady, making sure every single syllable hit its intended target with maximum impact. I'm talking about the simple fact that your entire financial background is a complete, fabricated lie. That bright red Ferrari parked out front? Dad leased it, and the dealership is actively looking to repossess it tonight because the massive payments bounced. And the massive estate you love bragging about to all of Mia's friends? Dad doesn't own it. I do. Grandpa Samuel left the entire inheritance to me in a blind trust to protect it from Dad's gambling debts. Carter's face went completely blank. His confident eyes darted nervously to Mia, who had suddenly gone very, very still beside him. "You're lying?" Carter stammered, his voice cracking noticeably. "Dad owns the house. He showed me the papers. Dad is currently homeless." I interrupted, delivering the final, fatal blow without a single ounce of mercy. "I legally evicted them. They signed the final legal paperwork 5 days ago to avoid a massive lawsuit for back rent. While you were standing here drinking expensive champagne, a cheap moving crew is packing all of their remaining clothes into a rented U-Haul truck. They have absolutely zero money, zero assets, and nowhere to live. So, when you get back from your fancy private island, Mom and Dad will be moving directly into your new house. Have a truly wonderful evening." The color instantly drained from Carter's face. He looked like he had just been hit head-on by a speeding cement truck. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but absolutely no sound came out. I shifted my hard gaze directly to Mia. Her perfectly contoured face was chalk white. Her eyes were wide with sheer, unadulterated panic. She belonged to a very strict family that demanded extreme financial security, and she had just legally married a man whose entire family was entirely bankrupt, completely fraudulent, and newly homeless. The grand Vanderbilt illusion was completely shattered into a million sharp pieces right in front of her eyes. I didn't wait for either of them to respond. The absolute horror radiating from their widened eyes was the only closure I ever needed. I turned smoothly on my heel, offered my arm gently to Chloe, and we walked calmly out of the lavish ballroom. I didn't look back once. I had finally dropped the lit match, and I didn't need to stay to watch the fake castle burn entirely to the ground. The very next morning, the sky over the massive estate was a heavy, gloomy gray, perfectly matching the exact reality of the grim situation unfolding on the ground. I absolutely didn't have to be there in person. Lawyer Harper had already arranged for the local sheriff's department to oversee the final property surrender to ensure everything went legally, peacefully, and smoothly. But I desperately needed to see it with my own 2 eyes. I needed to know for a fact that the heavy, toxic chapter of my past was officially closed forever. I drove my reliable little sedan into the quiet, upscale neighborhood and parked quietly across the wide street, partially hidden behind a large, sprawling oak tree. I rolled the driver's side window down just slightly, letting the cool, damp morning breeze blow into the car as I held a cup of coffee. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, Sheriff Davis pulled his official police cruiser into the long, circular driveway, his red and blue lights flashing briefly to signal his authoritative arrival. Right behind him was a rusted, beat-up, rented U-Haul truck. A few minutes later, the massive, heavy oak front doors of the estate finally swung open. Watching my parents physically walk out of that house for the very last time was a completely surreal, out-of-body experience. There was absolutely no dignity left in them. My mother, Martha, came out first. She was sobbing hysterically, her expensive mascara running down her pale cheeks in thick, dark black lines. She was desperately carrying 3 very expensive designer handbags clutched tightly to her chest, treating them as if holding on to them would somehow magically save her crumbling social status. She looked incredibly small, fragile, and entirely pathetic. Then came my father. Joseph looked like he had physically aged 20 years in a single stressful month. His broad shoulders were heavily slumped. His face was deeply unshaven, and he was violently arguing with one of the hired movers about a tiny scratch on a wooden dining chair. He looked completely defeated, entirely stripped of all the fake power, money, and intimidation he had constantly used to control me my entire life. As my father angrily turned around to grab another cardboard box from the porch, his eyes scanned the quiet street. He froze instantly. He saw my familiar sedan parked across the road. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the absolute, fiery rage and utter desperation ignite in his tired eyes. He dropped the heavy box he was holding. It hit the concrete driveway with a loud, echoing crash, spilling broken picture frames, loose papers, and old books onto the pavement. He started running aggressively toward the end of the driveway, his face turning a dangerous, unhealthy shade of purple. He completely ignored the sheriff loudly yelling for him to stay back on the property line. He crossed the quiet street in seconds and slammed his heavy, calloused hands violently against the metal hood of my car. "You ungrateful, malicious little brat!" My father screamed at the absolute top of his lungs, his voice hoarse, cracking, and filled with pure venom. "Look at exactly what you did. We have absolutely nothing left. We are living in a cheap, filthy motel tonight because of you. How could you possibly do this to your own flesh and blood? We gave you life." I sat completely calmly in the driver's seat. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking on the steering wheel. I looked at this desperate man who had violently punched me in the face just a month prior, and I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, hard, unshakable indifference. I slowly pressed the automatic button, rolling the driver's side window down just a few more inches. The crisp, cool morning air rushed into the cabin, carrying the distinct scent of freshly cut grass and my father's bitter, overwhelming desperation. "You gave me life," I said, my voice incredibly calm, measured, and completely devoid of emotion, cutting sharply through his hysterical screaming. "And you actively tried to ruin that life at every single opportunity just to make yourselves look slightly better to your rich friends. You physically assaulted me. You aggressively tried to steal my future. So, let's just call this a perfectly even trade." He stared blindly at me, his mouth hanging wide open, completely at a loss for words. He fully expected me to argue back. He expected me to yell, to cry, or to show some sign of guilt. He didn't know how to mentally handle the terrifying, unshakable calmness of a man who no longer cared about his existence in the slightest. "We're completely done here, Joseph," I said softly, looking him dead in the eyes. "Do not ever try to contact me again." I hit the button, rolling the thick glass window back up, permanently sealing off his frantic screaming. I put the car in drive, slowly pulled away from the curb, and left him standing entirely alone in the middle of the street, helplessly watching the only real asset he ever had drive away. Driving back to my apartment that morning, I felt an overwhelming, profound sense of deep emotional cleansing. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried on my shoulders for 29 years was simply magically gone. A few short weeks later, I received a thick, handwritten letter stuffed in my mailbox. The return address was a cheap, run-down apartment complex on the bad side of town. It was from Aunt Patricia, the exact same woman who had ruthlessly orchestrated the evil plan to steal my savings was now begging on her knees. The long letter was a pathetic, rambling mess, desperately asking for a massive family loan to help my parents secure a new apartment. She strongly hinted that if I just gave them a small, monthly salary from the trust, everyone could forgive, forget, and go back to being a happy family. I stood silently in my kitchen, reading her manipulative, toxic words. I didn't feel angry. I just felt completely exhausted by their endless, bottomless greed. I walked slowly over to my home office, fed the thick letter directly into the heavy-duty paper shredder, and watched her fake, hollow apologies turn into tiny, meaningless strips of paper. I never replied. The very next day, I drove back downtown to Harper's law office. I sat down at her large desk and confidently signed the final, binding legal authorizations regarding the property. I didn't want to live in the massive estate. The walls held far too many toxic memories, and the grand, empty hallways felt like a dark museum of fake love. But I absolutely wasn't going to let Grandpa Samuel's hard work and legacy go to waste. I formally instructed Harper to completely liquidate the physical house, tear it down, and repurpose the massive, valuable plot of land. I had a very specific, highly ambitious plan for the inheritance, and it was going to change absolutely everything. It is incredibly strange how quickly the universe drastically shifts its momentum once you finally gather the courage to cut the toxic anchors out of your life. The massive burst of raw confidence I gained from finally standing up to my abusive father bled directly into my professional career. I completely stopped holding back at work. I aggressively pitched a massive, highly complex logistical overhaul to the senior partners at my firm, utilizing the exact same sharp, uncompromising logic and strategy one had learned from dealing with lawyer Harper. Exactly 2 months after the final eviction, My cell phone rang while I was sitting at my desk. It wasn't my mother crying or Aunt Patricia begging for cash. It was a man named Mr. Sterling, the highly respected, incredibly successful CEO of a massive philanthropic logistics firm based out of Seattle. He had actually heard about my intense, ruthless legal battle through a mutual connection in the corporate law world. He was actively looking for a new director of West Coast operations, someone who didn't blink when the pressure was insanely high and the decisions were difficult. "I need a guy who knows exactly how to hold a hard line, Matthew," Mr. Sterling said over the phone, his voice booming with authority. "And from what I hear through the grapevine, you absolutely do not fold under pressure. The starting salary is double what you're making right now, plus full, comprehensive relocation benefits and a massive bonus structure. We want you in Seattle immediately." I didn't even have to think about it. I accepted the massive promotion on the spot. Chloe and I happily packed up our entire life into boxes and moved across the country to the beautiful Pacific Northwest. Leaving my toxic hometown felt like taking a massive, deep breath of crisp, fresh air after being held forcefully underwater for decades. 6 wonderful months after moving to Seattle, Chloe and I finally got married. We didn't have a massive, stressful, fake event with towering ice sculptures and hundreds of judgmental, whispering guests. We rented a beautiful, quiet, rustic cabin overlooking the breathtaking mountains. We invited only our closest, most genuine friends and colleagues. There was absolutely no one from my toxic blood family in attendance. No manipulative parents. No arrogant Carter. No scheming Aunt Patricia. But there was one very special, highly honored guest. I had quietly flown James, Grandpa Samuel's old, loyal butler, out to Seattle for the entire weekend, all expenses paid. He sat proudly in the very front row, wearing a sharp vintage suit, gently dabbing his eyes with a white handkerchief as Chloe and I exchanged our heartfelt vows. Having him there, witnessing my happiness, felt like Grandpa Samuel was actively watching over us from above, nodding in quiet, proud approval. It was the absolute happiest, most peaceful day of my entire life. I finally had a real, loving family. 2 full, incredibly peaceful years passed by. 2 years of absolute, golden silence from my old, toxic life. My new career in Seattle absolutely skyrocketed, and Chloe and I happily bought a beautiful, modern, spacious home in the quiet suburbs. It was completely funded by our own hard work and my new salary, leaving the massive trust account entirely untouched for its true, intended purpose. Eventually, my high-level job required me to fly back to my old hometown for a brief, highly important 2-day logistics conference. I hadn't planned on seeing anyone from my dark past. I just wanted to do my corporate presentations, grab some good food, and fly right back home to my wife. But karma has an incredibly wicked, undeniable sense of humor. On my very last morning in town, I walked casually into a small, generic, slightly run-down coffee shop near the convention center to grab a quick espresso before my flight. The little brass bell above the glass door chimed softly. I stepped up to the counter, looked up at the tired barista wearing a stained, dark green apron, and froze completely in my tracks. It was Carter. He looked absolutely terrible. The former golden child had seemingly aged a full decade in just 2 short years. He was alarmingly thin. His hair was messy and unstyled, and there were dark, heavy, exhausted bags under his eyes. He definitely wasn't wearing an expensive rented tuxedo, and there was absolutely no bright red Ferrari parked anywhere outside. He looked up slowly from the old cash register, his tired eyes locking directly onto mine. The remaining color completely drained from his pale face. We stared at each other in total, suffocating silence for a long, heavy moment. I didn't feel the sudden urge to gloat or laugh. I just felt a profound, overwhelming sense of pity. "Matthew," he mumbled quietly, wiping his shaking hands nervously on his dirty apron. "Hello, Carter," I said quietly, offering a small nod. He swallowed hard, looking down at the scuffed counter. "I guess you're doing really well. That's a very nice coat." "I am doing well. How are things with you?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral and polite. Carter let out a bitter, incredibly humorless laugh that sounded more like a cough. How do you think things are? Mia's family completely pulled the plug on the wedding exactly 2 days after your little stunt at the reception. The Vanderbilts absolutely do not marry into bankrupt, homeless families. She immediately annulled the brief engagement, aggressively kept the expensive ring, and completely ghosted me. Mom and Dad are currently living in a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment near the highway. Dad lost his prestigious country club membership and his pride, and Mom is working 40 hours a week as a receptionist at a local dentist's office just to pay for groceries. Are you finally happy now? You completely destroyed this entire family. I didn't destroy anything, Carter, I replied, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of any misplaced guilt. I just stopped actively setting myself on fire to keep all of you warm. The massive mountain of lies and the fake vanity destroyed the family. I just finally handed you the actual bill. Carter tightly clenched his jaw, gripping the hard edge of the wooden counter until his knuckles turned completely white. His raw bitterness was radiating off him in thick, heavy waves. Well, I sincerely hope you enjoy your millions of dollars. I actually drove past the old estate last month. I saw the massive construction crew aggressively tearing down the beautiful house. I assume you sold the precious land to some greedy, soulless corporate developer to build a bunch of cheap, ugly condos. Grandpa Samuel would be absolutely disgusted with you for selfishly destroying his beloved home just to make a quick, easy buck. I looked at my younger brother, shaking my head slightly. He still didn't get it. After everything that had happened, he still thought absolutely everything in life was purely about extreme greed and hoarding money. I reached calmly into my leather wallet, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and set it gently on the counter next to the register. Keep the change for the coffee, Carter. And for the record, you're completely wrong about the estate. He frowned deeply, looking genuinely confused. What exactly do you mean? I didn't sell the land to a commercial developer, I explained, looking him directly and intensely in the eyes. And I absolutely didn't build cheap condos. I took the entire, massive value of the inheritance, the large plot of land, and the liquidated assets from the house, and I used every single penny of it to establish a permanent, fully funded non-profit organization. Carter stared blankly at me, his mouth hanging slightly open in pure shock. A non-profit? Yes, I nodded proudly. It's officially called the Samuel Foundation. We completely finished the new construction 3 weeks ago. It's a massive, state-of-the-art, fully funded legal clinic and safe housing shelter. It is designed specifically to help desperate women and children aggressively escape severe domestic abuse, painful divorce situations, and toxic financial manipulation. The people who live there now don't ever have to worry about being hit or lied to, or having their futures violently stolen from them by the exact people who are supposed to protect them. The absolute, unadulterated shock on Carter's tired face was indescribable. All his bitter, comforting assumptions, all his fake narratives that I was just a greedy, jealous, spiteful brother, completely shattered into dust in that exact moment. He realized the terrifying, undeniable truth. I didn't take the massive estate out of petty spite. I took it to build something incredibly beautiful and lasting out of the toxic ashes our father had created. Grandpa Samuel's true legacy isn't a massive, empty house filled with fake, miserable people, I said softly, my voice filled with conviction. His real legacy is providing safety. His legacy is protecting the vulnerable and giving them a second chance at life. I think he'd be incredibly proud of what his money built. I didn't wait for him to process the massive weight of it. I turned around smoothly and walked confidently out of the small coffee shop, the brass bell chiming softly behind me. I stepped out into the bright, warm morning sun, hailed a waiting taxi, and headed directly to the busy airport. I was finally going home to my real family. I am currently sitting in my large corner office in Seattle, looking out the massive glass windows at the beautiful, rain-swept city skyline. The heavy wooden door behind me opens softly, and my incredible, loving wife, Chloe, walks in. She is smiling brightly, holding our happy, healthy 6-month-old baby boy, Leo, safely in her arms. I stand up from my large desk, walk over to them, and take my wonderful son gently into my arms. He laughs a bright, pure sound, grabbing my silk tie with his tiny, strong hands. I look down at his innocent face, and I make a silent, unbreakable vow to the universe. I will never, ever make him feel like a heavy burden. I will never constantly compare him to anyone else to make him feel small. And I will never, ever raise a violent hand to him. The dark, generational cycle of toxic manipulation, severe financial abuse, and physical violence officially stopped with me. I took the heavy, rusted chain my father tried to wrap tightly around my neck, and I broke it into 1,000 useless pieces. Sometimes, when the office is quiet, I log onto my computer and check the official website for the Samuel Foundation. I slowly scroll through the anonymous, highly emotional testimonials of the brave people who have found real refuge on the exact same plot of land where my father once violently punched me in the face. My arrogant parents lost a massive, beautiful house that they never truly appreciated or actually deserved. But because of that necessary loss, hundreds of desperate, highly vulnerable people gained a permanent, safe home where they will never, ever be silenced, manipulated, or abused again. Karma is a very real, incredibly powerful force in this world. It rarely shows up exactly when you expect it to, but it never, ever misses its intended target. It doesn't always look like angry revenge. Sometimes, the greatest, most powerful karma of all is simply a beautiful rebirth. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a very long and intense journey, but I truly appreciate you being here with me until the very end. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Family dynamics can be incredibly complicated and painful, and sometimes the absolute hardest, most difficult choices we have to make are the exact ones that finally set us completely free. Have you ever found yourself in a similar, toxic situation? Have you ever had to walk away completely from toxic people in your life, even if they were close blood relatives, just to protect your own peace and your future? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one of them. And finally, if you are still here, listening to my voice right now, you are officially part of the 1% Club. Please go down to the comments right now and type the letter W for winner. That is our secret code. It lets me know that you are one of the amazing, highly dedicated people who stayed with me to the very final second of the video. You guys are the absolute best. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and follow the channel. It really helps the community grow, and I can't wait to share more real experiences with you. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next one.